Back like boomerangs and spinal cords, it is the Sixers Talk podcast. So glad to be with you once again. Danny Pommells, Noah Levick, Ben Barry, our producer extraordinaire, in the cut like a Band-Aid. As usual, we are glad to be here on the eve of James Harden. As they say, one more sleep until Harden, hopefully. I mean, everybody's speculating, Noah, he might not even play, against the Timberwolves. Well, what is your thought quickly before we get into all these topics? Are we trending toward Harden against the Timberwolves?
Yeah, you got the team's president of basketball operations tweeting out that Minnesota should be ready for James Harden on Friday night. So sure seems that way. The Sixers are scheduled to practice today in Minnesota. So I assume if Harden feels good, we will see him on the court in a Sixers uniform Friday night, which everyone is understandably very excited about.
James Harden, the beard is here, as they say. 24 games to go for these 76ers, though, Noah. Equidistant here, 12 on the road, 12 at home. The Sixers, the third best away record, I should say. We know how the home record has been. The third best away record in the NBA at 19-10, best in the Eastern Conference. So I don't know how that will play into all that happens here as this team tries to develop and get some glue together. Hopefully they won't be shooting layups like Tyrese Maxey at the All-Star game, right? Like, we're hopeful that it won't be him and Scotty Barnes situation. But they'll be playing like Joel Embiid in the All-Star game and dropping 36 points. How weird was it watching that Maxey thing for you?
Yeah, that was something. I think give him credit. He smiles and laughs through it all. So. Right. Him and Scotty Barnes seem to have a good time, despite somehow 0 for 6 combined on. It was supposed to be the little Magic Johnson skyhook, I guess. But 3, 4, 5 foot shot. You expect NBA players to get 1 or 2 of those to fall. But hey, he had a good time, and that's what All-Star Weekend's all about.
Man, hearing Scotty Barnes talk about it afterward, he was pretty banged up about it. But like you said, Maxey smiling through it. And here we are on the eve of this thing. We'll get to Danny Green's comments on his Green Room podcast about Ben Simmons in a little bit. We will talk about this great article Noah Levick has on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com, 6 questions for the Sixers after the All-Star break with these 24 games to go. Hey, there is no Sixers basketball until Friday, but plenty of great hoops on tonight of teams the Sixers will be playing. The Cavs, the Bulls, the Nets, all in action tonight. So plenty of great basketball to check out. We're getting into the pressure cooker, Noah. This is the time where this thing really starts to bubble up. In your 6 observations and questions for the Sixers heading into this next, quarter of the season, we'll say, final quarter of the regular season. A lot of great points there. I encourage everyone to log on to NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com and check it out. Noah in his bag per usual. But guarding Harden and Embiid is one of the questions that I think everyone is trying to figure out, and not necessarily from the sense of how the opponents, and from my perspective, I think everyone's talking about how the Sixers will meld together Harden and Embiid to be this, immovable object. And how do you see that melding happening, Noah? Because we talked about in the past how Embiid likes to pop more than roll to the basket, and how that Harden lob that he enjoys so much with Clint Capella might not be a big feature of the two of them on the floor together, although they can do a myriad other things. Do you see the Sixers being able to, bring them together in a way that's immediately effective? Or do you think that there will be some growing pains that will come over the next weeks that will slowly come together?
Yeah, I'd expect growing pains of some sort, in part because James Harden hasn't played a basketball game since February 2nd, when he turned in a rather lackluster effort, by all accounts, against the Sacramento Kings in his last game as a Brooklyn Net. I think, yeah, your question about the pick and roll is one that everyone's really curious to see. I assume those two are going to be in tandem a lot because, of course, you want to force the opponent to cope with your best 2 players in the same action. Embiid, before the Harden acquisition, was candid about, I'm not really a lob guy. My strength in the pick and roll is the short roll, and also the pop is a real weapon at his disposal because unlike many 7-footers, he can get hot from 3-point range and he can knock down 2 or 3 of those in a row when he's feeling it. So I'm curious to see that. And, something I raised in this article, which, thank you for hyping up as much as you did. But I think zone defense is something this team is going to continue to face rather regularly because that's been a real struggle at times this season pre-Harden. And especially now that you've got a team where the conventional wisdom is you probably should double both Joel Embiid and James Harden. Well, a way to work around that is zone defense and just seeing if the Sixers can move the ball crisply and kind of execute the fundamentals there in a way that they have not thus far this season. But yeah, I think that this won't be, the peak version of the James Harden, Joel Embiid duo right away. But I do think there's reasons to believe they'll be a very good offensive team close to right off the bat, in part because James Harden is like such a smart, intuitive player, and he's very motivated here to give max effort and I think to bring his best game to the table in a way that was not the case in Brooklyn.
Hey, and I mentioned it will be a gauntlet for them coming up here as they got some tough games on the slate. And I guess the thing with James Harden hitting the ground running is that he has been looking svelte and in shape in his Sixers, practice gear. So do you think there's the existence of this fat suit, Noah? Does this fat suit exist that Harden slips on and slips off? Is there some bloating going on here? What is happening with his fluctuating weight?
That would be some scheme if there's a suit of any sort. I think in all likelihood, James Harden is photographed from many angles, and that is probably responsible for some of the differences in appearance. But yeah, he seems to be in good physical condition. He said at the introductory press conference he feels really good all around health-wise, but he acknowledged playing live action and getting on a floor in a game is totally different, as anyone who's played basketball knows. So we'll see if he's able to play like a full load of minutes right off the bat, or if they have to ramp him up a little bit. I think it's very clear at this point the number one priority is like avoiding re-injury, making sure his return to the court goes smoothly. But yeah, just the fact that he's so close, I think valid reason to be excited for sure.
Harden and Embiid, Harden enjoying or processing through this period of transition from the Nets and into the Sixers fold and, preparing himself to play, where Joel Embiid is having a completely different experience, 5-time All-Star with his son Arthur, taking questions at the podium, enjoying this, time of being lauded and praised for some of his accomplishments thus far, and then trying to finish his MVP campaign. So you would think Joel would be in a great frame of mind coming into this Harden situation. Is he in more position to, acquiesce his game to James, or is it James who should be adjusting to Joel? How do you see that?
I think the latter. I think Joel Embiid's the guy who might win MVP this season, and James Harden was an all-star, but he's not a
former MVP.
Former MVP, great resume, top 75 player. But right now, Joel Embiid's the superior player. He's has this massive usage rate, and there's no reason that should decline by a huge margin. Just year after year at this point, he's so efficient and difficult to stop in the post. He draws so many free throws. He can score from everywhere on the floor. There's no good reason that Joel Embiid should be sacrificing a ton, but of course there's an acknowledgement across the board here that everyone has to adapt when you have a new player in the fold who demands a lot of touches. But I think the Joel Embiid post-up and all things Joel Embiid have to continue to be a huge feature of the Sixers offense.
You mentioned something a bit earlier about the zone defense, which transitions into one of your other points from your 6 questions for the team heading into this time after the All-Star break. And who starts and who finishes. And, this amazing Milwaukee game where we got to see. I really was hoping that someone would go sit on the Milwaukee logo. It didn't happen because that's what Giannis did when he was in South Philly. But that didn't happen. The Sixers get this great win, and Doc Rivers pushes the right buttons, Noah, which is an obvious thing we'll get into in a bit here with one of your other observations. But he pushes the right buttons, and although Matisse starts, it's Furkan Korkmaz who finishes. And the minute disparity with Furkan playing 30 minutes and scoring 13 points, and Matisse only playing 15, but they both were effective in a way that led the Sixers to the win. So are you confident in what the Sixers have now? They add Willie Cauley-Stein to this mix from the bench perspective, and how the mixture will come together with Doc playing the all bench units and who's with that group and who starts for the Sixers and how that all comes together. How do you see that playing out?
Right. Well, Cauley-Stein, as you mentioned, unlike Embiid, he's for sure a lob guy. So right. I'm intrigued if he does indeed get opportunities to play over this 10-day contract, how he looks with James Harden and whether he catches a few of those lobs and appears threatening as a role man in that pick and roll.
Do you see them prioritizing him, since you brought it up, over Bassey in that type of position?
I'd assume he's ahead of Charles Bassey in the pecking order just because he's, I guess, seven years older and has more NBA credentials, and you figure they brought him in for a reason, and they probably want to see what he can do. He hasn't played for quite a long time.
Since November, right.
Yeah, and was dealing with a personal situation, and now is back in the NBA and will be returning to the floor. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, they've got a lot of options there. Of course, they've got the Pauls, Millsap, and Reed. I thought Millsap seems like he's still got some game, right. From that Milwaukee appearance, despite being 37 years old. So there's still time, of course, for other developments on the roster front. Players have to be waived by March 1st to be playoff eligible. So we've still got a little time here for someone to become available that might be of interest to the Sixers, whether it's a wing or it's another man in that center mix. As far as the bench overall, I think there are a lot of questions there, and not just at center. I think if you look at just the depth overall, there aren't a ton of players with great playoff credentials. Shake Milton, Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle. I'm not sure you feel great about any of these guys in terms of I need them to do X, Y, or Z in a playoff game, and I know they're going to get the job done, in part because they're young and Korkmaz and Milton in particular. There was the expectation that these guys would be shooters and that they would fill that role on this team, and they've disappointed on that front thus far, I think.
How deep will they go, though? If you imagine, it'll probably be a 9-man rotation at the most.
Yeah, well, we all I think assumed that last postseason, but there were some games where Doc Rivers was playing 10 and where he was going all bench, or he was going mostly bench, and being kind of stubborn about here's my second unit, here's my first unit, and I don't like to stagger these guys too much. I think theoretically it's a little easier for him to stagger now because he's got two offensive stars, and he's also got Tyrese Maxey, who's emerged as a great offensive threat. Tobias Harris, the team still sees him as someone who can chip in 20 points regularly. So I don't think it should be quite as difficult, but I think there are some vulnerabilities depth-wise, and I think there are just a lot of tough decisions on Rivers' plate. I'm going back to what you were talking about earlier, in part because Thybulle is such a unique player, right? He's among the league's best defensively, and there are nights where he's frankly among the league's worst offensive wing players. He took the shots that were available in the 48-point Boston loss, but he missed all 6 of them. And then in the Milwaukee game, he was noticeably turning down chances to shoot. the Sixers fell behind by 12 points, and then Doc Rivers just decided, like, I need someone who brings something to the table offensively. So he went with Korkmaz for that reason, and was rewarded for that. But I think there are going to be tough decisions like that he has to make, and some of it's probably going to be game to game. Some of it's going to have to be gut feel within games. I don't think it's an easy job that he's going to face this postseason. And then there's just like the leading a team, intangible, psychological angle of it. You know, the Sixers blew the huge lead in Game 4 and Game 5, and lost 3 home games last postseason. And it's a new roster, and they've got a new star in James Harden, but it's on the head coach to ensure that the team gets through, you know, any potential issues there. And if a lead starts to dwindle, that he is the guy who, you know, makes the right decisions and says the right things to right the ship for the Sixers.
You really intermingled and married some of those fatal flaws with that discussion on who starts and who finishes, Noah. And you make some great points because, you know, Doc Rivers is once again in this situation of trying to push the right buttons and trying to get the right people on the floor in order to help the Sixers, you know, get some of these wins and squeak out some of these close calls, particularly as they're sitting third in the Eastern Conference, 2.5 games out, with a chance to maybe even grab that home court advantage. Who knows what these teams will look like as they're currently constructed, and specifically teams. I'm talking about the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, yeah, the Sixers are still fighting with the Heat and the Bucks, but these are teams that they have faced and have already shown that they can hang with. So I'm optimistic that they have a chance to move up the standings from third. And I'm also optimistic that the Harden and Embiid marriage and this rotation, as far as the players are concerned, will work. I'm a little less confident that come the postseason, Doc Rivers will have everything working on all cylinders and be able to be as effective and impactful as a coach with his resume should be on the Sixers making this run to the finals. So, you know, I feel like the Sixers, you know, the fatal flaws, like you outlined in the article, are obvious, and there's easy, you know, inferences to draw with, you know, the Sixers' lack of defense, and Harden doesn't bring a whole lot of that, and maybe the rebounding might be an issue as well. But I feel like that Doc Rivers X factor is really, you know, weighing heavily on how far the Sixers can go, because, you know, we've seen some of these things and have pointed out and discussed the all bench units, and, you know, Tobias being with 4 bench players on the floor, and just him in this short window being able to make sure that he's getting the right stuff out of the right guys at the right time. So
yeah, just one little point that comes to mind there is we shouldn't exclude like George Niang from the starting closing.
Oh man, no, not at all. Yes.
Yeah. And then the natural follow-up question there is, does he play alongside Tobias Harris? Does he maybe even in certain situations play instead of Tobias Harris because the Sixers like Harris more with the second unit players? I think those are questions to sort through, and they're still largely undecided, in part because you've got such an impactful player who's going to handle the ball so much in Harden. But I think, of course, on paper, the fact that Niang shoots without hesitation and is a really good catch and shoot guy, those sort of players profile very well next to James Harden. And I think Sixers fans, you know, have come to appreciate here with Niang. He's tough, he's smart, he makes the sensible plays. Generally, those guys help you win playoff games. I think the concerns with him more are just the lack of athleticism and the foot speed. And if you're going with a switch-heavy defensive scheme, like, can George Niang hold his own if he's on a guard? Can he stay in front, of a powerful, athletic player? But man, he was great in that Milwaukee game. I mean, that might have been his best performance of the season. Like, held his own in, some situations against Giannis. Knocked down big time threes when the Sixers really needed them. And I think he's an important player for this team and potentially even a starter or closing player in some postseason games.
And are you trending toward a high level of optimism regarding how this pressure cooker 24 game, regular season translates to them being able to make some of those transitional and rotation pieces, all that materialize? Are you highly optimistic there?
I think they'll probably figure some stuff out. I'm not sure they'll be a finished product, though, when the playoffs start. 24 games is not much time, and that's assuming that everyone stays healthy, which isn't a sure thing with Joel Embiid and James Harden.
And
But
man, guys across the league have just been getting clipped off, and Levine getting his knees checked out, and Anthony Davis, and on and on. So a great point there.
yeah, so you hope for the best, hope for good luck. Joel Embiid hasn't had a lot of good luck with the playoffs. Maybe it's the year he finally gets it, and he's finally like 100%. But I think the Thibault versus Green or Thibault and Green question, of course, Doc Rivers and his staff have been thinking about that one throughout the season. So that's not new. It's
Right.
more you just want to see how they play with James Harden and the ways to best use them in that regard. But I think Matisse Thybulle, the Sixers are genuinely optimistic that he's made progress and playing out of the dunker spot and knowing how to cut and how to move around Joel Embiid post-ups. And I do think it's fair that he's overall trending in the right direction there. But boy, he's got to shoot the ball when open. He's got to make some of them. I think it's probably just going to boil down to that. And I think the best case scenario for the Sixers is just he's good enough offensively that all the other stuff is moot. And it's oh, of course you play Matisse Thybulle because he's knocking down 40% of his threes and one or two
asking for 40%.
Yeah, maybe that's yeah, a little high number, but just the notion that there's no question because this guy's a world-class defender and he's more than passable offensively. But we're not there yet. He's not dependable offensively. Sometimes he's a major negative offensively, and that's why the Sixers face these fascinating yet difficult questions about some of these lineups post-Harden trade.
And 2 out of 5, is that 40%? Is my math good there? Come on, bro. Yeah, asking for 2 out of 5.
That's solid, and many of them, when Matisse Thybulle is involved, this is not. I'm not double checking this with the numbers, but I'd wager that many of them are quite open or are at least open because the defense wants him to be open. So, yeah, you'd hope he can knock them down. I don't think, as I've said before, I don't think Matisse Thybulle has a grotesquely broken shot. I think when his feet are under him and he's confident and he's holding the follow through and checking off some of those boxes, he can make open jump shots. I don't doubt that to be the case. So, hey, maybe he's due for that percentage to rise a little bit, and maybe just playing alongside James Harden will be a good thing for him offensively. I think that's without a doubt the ideal situation for the Sixers.
I was more, I think, a Danny Green starting guy, and Matisse's energy coming off the bench, I think, is an injection the Sixers could use. But you brought up a point in the past with his soft tissue injuries where I feel like I'm more focused on the version of Danny Green we were getting last season approaching the postseason as opposed to the one that we have now who isn't quite as healthy or isn't quite as on his game as he was then. So I think I'm coming around to the idea more of Matisse, just going with it. You know what I mean? And Danny coming off the bench as a solid veteran who can, step in and doesn't need, a jump start or can be a bit of a microwave in some instances and kind of be a plus that way. So I'm 2 out of 5, man. That's all I'm focused. 2 out of 5.
You need, yeah. No, that's a great point. I hadn't really, even sort of factored that into things to consider, but you sure want Danny Green to be healthy in the playoffs, and you do
Right.
maximize his chances of that if you're not playing him, 30 minutes in some game in March just because you're pushing for a slightly higher seed.
And he's doing some heavy warm up routine leading into trying to start, as opposed to knowing he's coming off the bench, so he's not, getting ramped up, or maybe some wasted energy in that aspect.
Those little variables do matter, and I don't like want to sound disrespectful to Danny Green as we talk about this, and just be implying that any little movement is going to cause an injury.
Right, right.
I think it's more just something that matters because he is an important player for this team. And
Right.
one of the big reasons they lost that series to the Hawks is when Danny Green got injured, Furkan Korkmaz started, played heavy minutes, and was like significantly worse than Danny Green on both ends of the floor. The Sixers can't afford something like that this time around. So, that's a great point. I think for me, I just want to see what Matisse Thybulle looks like next to James Harden. I'm really fascinated, and maybe I don't think it's so wild to think that Harden will elevate Thybulle's game a little bit, and maybe some of those threes will be even a little more open, or maybe he'll get some nice opportunities off cuts where Thybulle, is open and Harden finds him, and I just want to see what that looks like. I think that's an important question in all of this. But as I said, I don't think any of it's super easy or no-brainer at this stage. I think it's a lot of stuff to sort through, and really curious to see how Doc Rivers handles it.
A fun discussion, man, and we could go on and on, but we will take a timeout here and come back and talk a little bit about more about Danny Green and his comments regarding Ben Simmons and his departure. We'll hit a couple of key points and interesting perceptions that he had, and they'll take a timeout and come back here on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilMU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
We're back on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU works. Danny Green on his Green Room podcast. Good podcast, man. Give the guy credit. He has brought his opinions and thoughts, and I don't know, straddled that line a bit about, being truthful and critical, and, giving his thoughts and perceptions. And he, regarding Ben Simmons, said that Ben wasn't really that cordial with Curry or Drummond. And for me, you look into them becoming this juggernaut and, having all these pieces and signing Goran Dragic and, cutting bait on some guys and bringing in Ben Simmons, and you get Curry as, one of the greatest shooters, just all the, Drummond as the league's best backup big, and, all that momentum and thought of how they're bringing something together that will be really formidable. And, Danny pokes holes in that with the thought that, he wasn't really cool with those dudes like that, for them to be like welcoming, or them to have this great rapport that they're, reigniting. Do you feel like it's more Frankenstein with the Nets rather than like Voltron? You know what I'm saying? Like do you see it more like them being able to really pull this all together, and KD being able to, lead these guys to win the Eastern Conference or what have you? Or do you see it as more of a work in progress?
Yeah, I think there are some obstacles to work through there, but I think the talent level still remains really high, and I don't think anything there is like impossible to reconcile. To the Curry and Drummond like points in particular.
Yeah, like if Ben wasn't like, if all of a sudden he wasn't playing for the Sixers and you weren't really that cool, like, do you just go to the Nets and become like close boys again, or
right? Yeah,
for the first
I mean,
time,
I know, my impression was Seth Curry and Ben Simmons got along pretty well last season. And I remember Curry, even when he joined the team, like that was one of the things he was most excited about, was playing along Ben Simmons and the pace and the transition threes that, would be a natural byproduct of that. Of course, like no one was thrilled with the first, 50 some games of this season where Ben Simmons didn't want to be here. And, you saw the body language in those practices, the few minutes that TV cameras were there. He was going through the motions to be generous, and that's an awkward situation for a teammate, where you're ideally using practice to get better. And yeah, that's distracting to have a teammate who's taking that stance. With Drummond, he was not happy about having a teammate in that situation, of course, but I think both those guys ultimately value being professionals and making the most out of every situation. So I think their on-court play illustrated, they never let that bug them to the extent of, being furious at Simmons or feeling that, this was something that prevented them from doing their jobs, So I imagine that same mentality will be the case in Brooklyn. And I think you even saw in that first game, Simmons was on the bench. He's laughing and having a good time with Drummond, who I will say is a very good-natured guy and makes people laugh and people like being around him. So I don't personally imagine either of those issues, splintering a locker room or anything along those lines, but awkward. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to characterize it. The way it was here and the way it probably was, when they learned that they were being traded to Brooklyn alongside Ben Simmons. Then I'll just briefly bring up with Goran Dragic. I'm not sure if I've told this story before, but the Miami Sixers series in 2018, and Dragic kind of blatantly slapped Simmons upside the head. I think he got a flagrant or technical foul. Wasn't ejected, but some sort of punishment for that. And then I remember I went in the Miami locker room to ask about that play, what happened on the play. And he just stared straight in my eyes and said, nothing. So just stone cold. I'm not going to give you anything. I'm not going to make up an excuse. I'm just going to pretend that what you saw was not what happened. So I found that kind of amusing with Dragic, but again, he's someone who's seen and done a lot in the NBA, and I don't imagine some incident from 4 years ago is going to prevent him from being a teammate of Ben Simmons. But is this a situation where everyone joins the team already with great friendships? No, there's going to have to be some bonding that takes place, and as with the Sixers, there's going to be sacrifices necessary and an understanding of what guys are best in what roles and all those little nuances that make an NBA team work well. But I don't imagine any of that being impossible to conquer for Brooklyn. I still think they're an East contender if they're healthy and if Kyrie Irving is able to play full time, which we shall see on that particular question.
The icy glare of Goran Dragic staring through your soul. That must have been fun.
Yeah. I was a little taken.
Was it a scrum? Were other people around, or just you and him?
No, I think I might have briefly gotten him just for that question in the locker room. And I said, okay. It was the type of thing where normally you try to probe a little further or see if you could take an angle to get a little more clarity, but he left nothing open to interpret.
Right.
Nothing happened.
No crevice.
Nothing happened about it. So
who's bringing the ball up in Brooklyn, though? Is Ben bringing the ball up? Is Kyrie bringing it up? Ben's strength is tempo and
exactly.
pace, so.
Yeah, I think ideally, as we saw first, as not first, but in the bubble rather prominently before Simmons got hurt, the idea was Ben Simmons was the transition point guard, and then in half-court offense, he was the power forward. But Simmons considers himself a positionless player, a player without any labels to his name. which I think is fair enough. But yeah, I think obviously Kyrie Irving in the half court is more threatening offensively than Ben Simmons with the ball in his hands. I think I'm curious, of course, to see how much Ben Simmons might be employed as a small ball five, which was always intriguing here, but we never saw in heavy doses. I think, of course, now they've got Drummond as their like conventional five, but I think Ben Simmons is still promising as a player who can exploit mismatches, offensively against, other centers in the half court and be really dynamic as a screener and roller. So I think they most likely will use him in a bunch of ways and try to maximize the strengths and avoid the well-known weaknesses as well as they can.
Well, we don't know a whole lot about what Ben Simmons has been up to, but we do know that he was working on his shot in some capacity with Kyle Korver, as video of him in the Brooklyn practice facility was circulating on social media. And, he was shooting it left-handed from the free throw line with Korver, and, all types of inferences can be drawn. But whatever inference you draw from that, Steve Nash on the record is saying that KD is closer to coming back and playing than Ben Simmons is, which kind of pours water on the idea that by March 10th, Ben will be on the floor. But who knows how that will play out. Getting to one of Danny Green's points, he also said that Ben doesn't like to play in Philly. So, why would he be here on March 10th playing if he doesn't like to play here? Possibly he'll be on the bench. He'll travel with the team. But whether that being the time that he would probably make his debut, I think is very, I guess, narrow-minded. I don't know if that's the right way to think about that, but I would think that he would have to have some intestinal fortitude to be like, you know what, I'm going to take this head on. But, if mental health issues arise from you being in a certain situation, why would you want to take that head on like that so soon? So are you surprised by Danny's comments saying Ben doesn't like to play in Philly? I mean, it definitely leaves it unequivocal speculation. Any speculation goes out the window.
Right. Of course, that's Danny Green's perspective. That's not Ben Simmons saying it directly, but
right.
I think it closely aligns with the idea of Ben Simmons didn't want to be a Sixer anymore. He wanted to be on another team. Simmons did specifically say in that introductory press conference, like, this wasn't about the fans or about things that were said in the media. So at least judging by those comments, it's, not impossible for him to, play in Philadelphia anymore, or he doesn't hate the fans or anything like that. But look, that's going to be a very, very challenging environment if he plays in that game. I think everyone's aware of it. It'll be highly vitriolic and a lot of hatred, and there's potential for ugliness. And like, I don't even say this facetiously, like, there should be an enhanced security presence for that game. Like, it's really going to be a spectacle, and you just hope it's not an ugly spectacle. I think perhaps for Simmons, like, you can rip the Band-Aid off a little. You can just get it over with because there's the chance that you do play the Sixers in the playoffs. And I imagine he wants to be available for all those playoff games and to be at his best in all those playoff games, and at least having the experience of already, having a regular season game in Philadelphia under his belt as a road player. Maybe that's a good thing for him, but I think it's all just wait and see right now. It doesn't seem like the Nets have a great idea either. As you said, they don't expect him back before Kevin Durant. They're ramping him up. They're taking their time with him. And we'll see what happens as far as when he debuts and if he indeed plays in that March 10th game.
And New York's vaccine mandate reportedly being lifted in about a month or so, maybe in the coming weeks. So that will mean Kyrie will be eligible to play in home games again, which would throw another, wrench in the works there. So we'll keep an eye on everything that's happening tonight. Hey, great slate of basketball on tonight. NBA is back after the hiatus for the All-Star festivities. Noah Levick, Nets and Celtics is on my radar tonight. Anything you're looking forward to checking out?
That's probably the game to watch. Yeah, I guess Boston still carried that winning streak over, I believe. Or no, they lost right after the Sixers, I think. So
to New York, right?
I want to say Washington. But,
Washington. Okay. Well, whoever it was.
Yeah,
that's a good game.
They are playing good basketball, and they're a rising team, perhaps. So yeah, we'll see how they look against Brooklyn. I think that's probably the game to watch. I think, kind of putting myself in like Sixers fan shoes for a second, I'd say I'd encourage you to focus on the Sixers. I think the Sixers are an exciting team right now. James Harden's jersey was like the most sold jersey, since the trade. This is the team that people want to watch, and it's your team. And Ben Simmons and the Nets will be on the radar on March 10th, and perhaps they will be a playoff opponent. But this team is worth watching, and they have an MVP contender in Joel Embiid. And just watching the All-Star festivities and the top 75 presentation and all of that, I think the next time that comes around, you figure Joel Embiid has a good chance to be among those honored, as one of the best players in league history. So I think that's worth appreciating. And I think it's understandable to be fascinated by this Brooklyn situation because it's so bizarre and there are so many interesting dynamics there. But the Sixers are a really, really interesting team now as well.
Yes, man, I agree, bro. Top 100, Joel, 5 All-Star games in, maybe an MVP this season, maybe a scoring title as well. And maybe, you could easily see him getting 5 more All-Star game appearances over these next 7 years, maybe if he stays healthy. So credit to him for what he's created. And, we have about a almost 4-minute clip on the website of Joel from the All-Star game, just reflecting on some things in his career and talking about how he almost retired, when his brother died, and just a nice little, moment of a woosah moment where you kind of take a deep breath and just kind of take in all that Joel's been through. And, I think there's a video of him on there with the low haircut and, scuffling around as a young player in the first or second year and not playing. So check it out if you have the time. But we're going to get out of here in the Sixers Talk podcast. Well said, Noah. Great job as always. Thank you to Ben Berry, our producer. I'm Danny Pommells. We're brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU Works. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the game tomorrow against the Timberwolves.